Day 1292 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 1,089,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 910 in the past day. Then as for hardware, 5 tanks, 4 APVs, and 29 artillery. And now, direct to the map and into Russia, but not especially due to the conventional series of incidents that we would normally see. Instead, over the past 24 hours, it's a case of what we're more likely to see a great deal of on the map in the coming weeks and months. All owing to the fuel crisis creep, which is now occasionally touching upon the more affluent western regions of the country, including Saratov and Moscow, with reports coming in from a handful of districts within those regions showing a shortage of 95-octane gasoline. And beyond that, the reports of long stretches of car lines that takes hours for the chance to fill up the tank. And in one case, a wait time of 8 hours, although that particular report was isolated to the further south and the far east so far. Now to take a look at the footage here, and when you consider it takes 5 to 7 minutes from start to finish to fill up the car, that's exactly where wait times can start to get out of control when you see lines like these. Plus, add on the reality on the ground, at the pump, where Russian motorists vent their anger and frustration, but also taking additional time in their tossing up between choosing to switch to a higher or lower octane blend where necessary to fill up their tanks. And where we head to a new type of map now, the fuel crisis map, where we see Russia's most populated regions in the west, the southwest, and the far east are included in many of the regions here that are starting to deal with the fallout of Ukraine's unique brand of oil sanctions. As for Moscow, being the capital, fuel shortages here are highly visible and politically sensitive. If drivers in Moscow can't fill up, it signals deep cracks in the fuel supply chain. But even now, as the ripple effect from successful strikes on oil refineries begin to manifest, Russian motorists are still yet to fully feel the impact of these disruptions on their fuel supply. Moreover, there needs to be additional room to account for upcoming UAV strikes by the AFU, suggesting a difficult time ahead on the Russian horizon. Russia wanted the USSR back. Well, here it is. Now, the fuel of choice for your typical military is diesel, which is less affected in Russia right now. But two things to mention. Firstly, Russia is not your typical military. In fact, its fuel dependence has been shifting in an unusual direction, because instead of relying purely on diesel-heavy equipment, it's now a case of large swaths of its forces that are pressed into using civilian-grade gasoline engines, with its army increasingly filling out its fleets with whatever can be scrapped together, from soldiers on motorbikes to rear units pressed into service with Gaz Buhanka vans, which, by the way, are almost entirely automotive gasoline 92-octane vehicles, and not diesel, the things you know. And then of course we see a fair share of the basic Lada sedans and other civilian cars used by their army, as commanders are plugging gaps with whatever turns over on a key, stretching their army's logistics web to mirror that of a patchwork taxi fleet rather than a coherent mechanized force. Then secondly, on the topic of diesel supplies yet to be noticeably affected, there's the overall knock-on effects to be considered, as civilians and the economy compete for transport. Trucks moving food, spare parts, and raw materials all rely on diesel, but they also need gasoline vehicles for local distribution. As such, civilian shortages can disrupt the broader logistics chain that the military indirectly depends on. Shortages mean slower mobilization and weaker rear area support, noting that in past conflicts, governments learned that civilian fuel pain quickly bleeds into military readiness. Of course, Russia would almost certainly ration gasoline to military and police units, which in turn deepens the overall fuel crisis while starving agriculture, freight, and infrastructure, not to mention a cost of goods inflation that spreads into all areas of society, all of which undermines the very supply chains the military depends on, an escalating vicious cycle, the gas station of a country without gas. So Russia needs to find a solution to this unfolding early stage crisis, and it would need to be a lot more than covering refineries with drone netting. Then on the map, and to something you don't see every day in Russia, protests, as local residents took part in protests in the city of Omsk, and where approval to protest in the city of Novosibirsk in Russia's central Siberian region and Vladivostok in the far east is awaiting approval from the authorities. But as for Omsk, granted approval to protest due to being organized by one of the smaller political factions in the region, is where locals were speaking out against a different set of war-related issues. In this case, due to Russia's blocking of audio and video calls on Telegram and WhatsApp. They also protested mobile internet outages, which have not been working in Omsk for the better part of 3 months now. The reasons are many, but they certainly include information control alongside military and security reasons, noting that Omsk is home to Russia's largest oil refinery, which outputs almost 10% of all refined fuels for the country, and is also within Flamingo fire-breathing range. As for the WhatsApp and Telegram audio and video call blocking, both messaging platforms have a large user base in Russia at about 80 million monthly users per app, but they're seen now as a tool of disinformation by the Russian government where it comes to their SMO, leading to the blocking of calls that would no doubt inherently become critical of the Russian military when serving members of the Russian SMO simply call home to say what's what. So a question here might be, why doesn't Russia simply block these apps at the ISP level? Well, Russia could, for example, block Telegram, technically speaking, but the last time they attempted that, back in 2018, the move turned into one of the most spectacular internet censorship failures in history. And that's not an overstatement, because back then Russia's internet watchdog attempted to strangle Telegram by brute force, blocking millions of IP addresses, blacklisting 19 million to contain the information threat. But the problem here was that most of those IP addresses were belonging to Amazon and Google Cloud networks, as Telegram was using those services to mask traffic through domain fronting. So Moscow's blanket ban was meant to cut it off, but instead broke much of Russia's own internet, online banking, airline booking systems, retail sites, payment services, and even Russia's own mail.ru services. The sheer scale of collateral damage was staggering. In one case, for Amazon, out of the 3 million addresses blocked, only 18 of those had actually belonged to Telegram. The campaign quickly became infamous as a textbook case of failed scorched earth tactics applied to cyberspace. So rather than stopping Telegram, it crippled large parts of the digital economy. And the real kicker of a backfire here was that it had led to Telegram more than quadrupling in popularity within Russia since then. So in short, Omsk's protests highlight Russia's paradox. A state that permits only token dissent, yet fears the same apps the people rely on. It shows how the war has seeped into every corner of Russian life, exposing fractures far beyond the battlefield. Then to elsewhere on the map, and where it wouldn't be an average day in Russia without at least one war-related fire on their local front, as Sabotage partisans burned down the communications tower at the 51st Airborne Regiment in Tula. Following that, a similar sentiment could be found in Moscow itself, as posters with Ukraine's Intel logo and the words "responsibility is inevitable" appeared across various districts on the same day as Ukraine's Military Intelligence Day, which suggests a special link between Ukraine's Military Intelligence Division and the could-be or should-be saboteurs hiding within plain sight within the capital. Now to the main map and into the Dograpilla direction where the choke point operations are on, as the Ukrainian Defense Forces cleared Volodymyrivka, consistent with previous days' updates, and pushed the enemy back near Razina, and other Russian vestiges left hanging around in the northernmost part of this axis. And to zoom in here, it's at the Novotoretska village where Ukrainian Defense Forces have also broken through, expanding the grey zone around the settlement, biting into the last remaining Russian G-lock, or ground line of communication, with G-lock meaning mean much more than just a communication line, but rather it refers to physical routes that connect a deployed force to its bases and supply hubs. And to really zoom in here, you can see it's becoming a route under serious pressure for the Russian forces right now. Then, at the same time, Russian channels are continuing to report on the situation near Juzzie and other areas in this sector as being very difficult with Ukrainian counterattacks, and where they also say fresh Ukrainian reserves are being brought in. These complaints are coming in steady now. Then to head southeast inland, as Ukrainian drones carried out strikes overnight against occupied Makivka, with the most serious damage reported at a Russian military site. The target appears to have been a barracks facility used to house troops, which echoes past Ukrainian strikes in the town that's exposed its vulnerabilities. Oddly enough, the Russian army has continued to refer to Makivka as the safe rear, but it's anything but these days. Now, once upon a time, its distance of 50 kilometers from the front was considered a chasm for the AFU, a tactical limitation to overcome, but these days, it's just considered a Tuesday. Then to head to the northern Donetsk region, where we see more of the to and fro activity between the two opposing armies. Firstly, where Kremlin troops advanced up to 300 meters or about 900 feet at the Sebryanska forestry, headed in the southern direction to the Donetsk River. Though if you look closely on the map, you'll notice this actually isn't Donetsk, it's Luhansk, the region Russia claimed to capture the entire area of months ago. Then as for the Frone, this one is in Donetsk proper, as just nearby to the northwest, the AFU's 425th Separate Assault Regiment liberated the village of Zarichne, with some on-the-ground footage of access inside the village uploaded by the 425th. Russia's spring, summer, fall, or whatever you want to call it, campaign has really turned out to be most unusual, with a lot of the time spent on the defense. Then to the news and into the US, where President Donald Trump is again positioning himself as mediator at the center of the Russo-Ukrainian war, signaling a direct diplomatic push and hinting at more pressure on Moscow, which could manifest in the form of sanctions or additional military aid inclusions to Ukraine. Speaking to reporters, Trump said that he would hold a call with Vladimir Putin very soon, over the next couple of days, quote unquote, and that European leaders are expected in Washington for consultations. It might give you a massive case of deja vu. This latest Washington update has a low chance of reshaping battlefield realities in the near term, but it highlights that diplomacy, if nothing more than stalling diplomacy from the Kremlin, is back on the table. Now, as for Kremlin news, Dmitry Medvedev is threatening war with Finland, warning that Russia won't play nice with Finland like in 1944, putting him back on the threats counterboard. So another inconsequential remark from the former one-term seat-warming Russian president that has more bark than bite. But then to a more official Kremlin stance that weighs in on Washington's latest approach, and straight from the toilet brush spokesperson's mouth, Peskov, reaffirming that no sanctions will be able to make Russia change its consistent position, which is a very interesting use of words, as the only consistent Russian position in this part of the hemisphere has been to wage war on Ukraine until total capitulation. Now to round off the video with some news, some Russian news, worthy of a funnies segment, because in Saransk of Russian Republic of Mordovia, a 300,000 population, where local news presented the fuel shortage crisis as a great mystery with no coherent explanation, and only to say that motorists are speculating as to why. So first of all, great investigative journalism right there from Mordovia News 24, to be expected. And second, my favourite part is where the news reporter quotes the supplier on delays, which of all places is coming late from Nizhny Novgorod, or as I like to call it, Nizhny Not So Good, and where the supplier said, quote, "As a result, it is unknown when gasoline will be available at Gazprom's gas stations, but we are not talking about a global fuel shortage," end quote. And no, we are not talking about a global fuel shortage. Just a Russian one. The place where oil refineries shine their brightest at night, and where the investigative journalism fails to follow the simplest of breadcrumbs, completely incapable of going back to the source. So, I'll do it for them. With, in this case, the Kostovo oil refinery in Nizhny Novgorod, where the oil refinery has been not so good, being a recipient of 5 separate UAV strikes this year alone, and all coming at a time of constant Ukrainian long-range drone strikes that have taken out up to a quarter of all Russian oil refining output capacity since August. And as for the Kostovo refinery, there's no shortage of photographic evidence of this, with each refinery fire burning brighter than the last. And one of the last ones was a real fiery pits of Mordor doozy. So this is Russia, where every level of government, which includes their state-controlled broadcast media, are just burying their heads in the sand. So we all continue to wish them good luck with that approach. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. I think I'm losing my voice, but I'm able to squeeze this one out. So thanks again, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!